I still remember the exact weight of the silence in this house. It had a texture to it, thick, warm, settled into the walls like old smoke. After David died, that silence became something I wore like a second skin. 3 years of mornings where the coffee brewed for one. 3 years of evenings where the television stayed off because the sound of other people's laughter felt like an accusation. The house didn't echo anymore, it simply held its breath. Then John came home. He arrived on a Thursday evening in late October, when the maple in the front yard had gone fully gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and endings. I heard his car in the driveway before I saw him, that old, unreliable engine he refused to replace, and something in my chest did a thing it hadn't done in years. It simply lifted. He looked like his father around the jaw. He always had. But his eyes were mine. That particular shade of gray-green that David used to say looked like the ocean before a storm. When John stepped out of the car and smiled at me across the yard, I stood on the porch and thought, here is the one person on earth who knows exactly what we lost. "Mom," he said. Just that. And I walked down the steps and held him, and he was taller than I remembered, broader across the shoulders, and he smelled like cold air and coffee and something unfamiliar that belonged entirely to the life he'd been building without me. We stood in the driveway for longer than was strictly necessary. I told myself it was just relief. The first week was easy in the way that first weeks always are, full of distraction and busyness, the logistics of cohabitation smoothing over anything complicated. He took David's old room without discussion, which was the right thing, the only thing, and I appreciated that he didn't make it strange. He helped me with the gutters. He reorganized the garage in a way that made no sense to me, but clearly meant something to him. He cooked dinner twice, badly, and we laughed about it at the table the way I hadn't laughed in a very long time. Laughter, I discovered, had become unfamiliar to my body. It felt almost startling, that loosening in the chest, the way it caught me off guard. I was grateful and unnerved in equal measure. It was the second week when things began to shift, though I couldn't have named the moment precisely. It was more of a gradual accumulation, small things that landed differently than they should have. The way he would come into the kitchen while I was cooking and stand close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, leaning past me to steal something from the cutting board, his arm brushing mine in a gesture so casual it had no business making me go still. The evenings on the back porch. We had fallen into a habit of sitting outside after dinner, even as the October air sharpened toward cold. He would bring out 2 glasses of wine, and we would sit in the old wicker chairs that had survived 15 years of weather, and we would talk, really talk, the kind of conversation that has no agenda, that wanders wherever it needs to go. About David sometimes, about John's plans, or lack of them, about what I missed and what I didn't, about the particular loneliness of being the last one awake in a quiet house. One night he asked me, "Were you happy, before, with him?" It was not the question I expected. "Yes," I said after a moment. "Not perfectly, but genuinely." He nodded slowly, looking out at the dark yard. "I want that," he said. "I want to know what that looks like from the inside. I never really saw it." "You were there," I said, surprised. "I saw the surface of it," he said. "I never saw what made it real." I looked at him in the dim light from the kitchen window and felt something move through me that had no clean name. He was not asking about David and me, not exactly. He was asking about something larger, about the interior life of love, about how 2 people sustain each other across years, and grief, and the grinding ordinariness of days. He was 24 years old, and he was asking me the question I had never fully answered for myself. "Presence," I said finally. He was just present. Not always happy, not always easy, but there. John was quiet for a while. Then he reached across the small space between our chairs and put his hand over mine on the armrest, just briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement, of shared understanding. It lasted only a few seconds. I thought about it for 3 days. I am not a woman who permits herself much confusion. I raised a child largely alone after 40. I managed a household through grief and financial strain and the 1,000 small indignities of loss. I am practical. I am self-aware. I do not indulge in muddy thinking. So I looked at what was happening between us with the same clear-eyed attention I gave to everything else, and what I saw unsettled me. It was not anything simple. It was not anything I had a ready category for. It was the way he had begun to occupy the house differently, not like a guest, not entirely like a child returned, but like something I couldn't quite classify. He moved through the rooms with an ease that felt intimate, in the true sense of the word, familiar, unhurried, attuned. He noticed when I was tired before I said so. He knew when I needed quiet and when I needed company, and he calibrated himself accordingly with an attentiveness that David had taken years to develop. It was that attentiveness that frightened me, because I felt it. Not the way one feels seen by a stranger, which is brief and superficial. I felt it the way you feel warmth after a very long cold, slowly, in the bones, in the places that had gone numb without your realizing it. I was lonely. I understood that. 3 years of a particular kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of isolation, but the loneliness of invisibility, of being a body that moved through the world without anyone truly tracking it. John saw me. He always had. He was the kind of child who watched adults closely, who understood emotional weather long before he had words for it. But now he saw me in a way that had shifted somehow, that had acquired a quality I couldn't comfortably explain away, and I saw him back, which was the problem. I saw the way he sat at the kitchen table with his coffee in the morning, shoulders slightly rounded, looking out the window with an expression I recognized as his father's, that quality of internal distance, of being partly elsewhere. I saw the way he moved when he thought no one was watching, easier and more graceful than his public self. I saw the way he was, beneath the competence and the humor and the carefully maintained lightness. He was lonesome. He was searching. He was 24 years old, and he had come home because he didn't know yet what he was building, and the house and I were familiar, and familiar felt, for the moment, like enough. I understood this completely. That was the difficulty. There was an evening in the 3rd week that I returned to often. We had been in the living room, the two of us, doing nothing in particular, him with a book he wasn't reading, me with the kind of small mending that keeps your hands occupied while your mind wanders. The lamp in the corner cast a warm, honey-colored light, and the rain had been falling against the windows for hours, and the house felt more inhabited than it had in years. He got up to refill his wine and stopped behind the couch where I was sitting and stood there a moment, reading over my shoulder, not the mending but just present, close, his hand resting on the back of the couch near my shoulder without touching it. "You've been quiet tonight," he said. "I'm often quiet. Not this quiet." I set down my mending and looked up at him, which meant tilting my head back, and for a moment we were at an odd angle to each other, his face above mine, his expression open and searching in a way that made something in my chest pull tight. "I've been thinking," I said. "About?" I chose carefully. "About how long it's been since the house felt like a home." He was silent for a moment. Then he came around the couch and sat beside me, close, closer than necessary on that wide cushion, close enough that his shoulder was a steady warmth against mine. "It feels like one now," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. "That's what I've been thinking about." We sat like that for a while without speaking. The rain came harder against the glass. At some point his head tilted just slightly toward mine, not quite a lean, not deliberate, simply a giving way to gravity that landed his temple near my hair, and I did not move away, and we sat in that small, warm orbit until the lamp flickered once and the spell broke and we both straightened and reached, simultaneously, for our separate wine glasses. We did not look at each other for a moment. When we did, we both, I think, saw the same thing in the other's face, that acknowledging look that says, "I know what that was, and I know what it cannot be." Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. After that evening, we were both more careful. Not coldly. Not with the awful manufactured distance of people performing normalcy, but with the gentle, conscious care of two people who understand that some doors are better left with a hand against them than opened. We still sat on the porch. We still talked through the evenings. He still stood too close in the kitchen sometimes, and I still let him. But there was something now that functioned like a shared agreement. An acknowledgement that whatever lived in the space between us was to be held, not examined too closely, not acted upon. It sounds perhaps like a kind of grief. It was, a little. But it was also something I had not expected. A form of tenderness. There is a particular sweetness to the thing you do not take. A dignity in it. I had not known that before. He told me he was leaving on a Sunday morning in November, over coffee and toast and the particular gray light of a day that has decided against the sun. "I've been thinking," he said, which is what he always said when he'd already decided, "about the job in Portland. I think I'm going to take it." I looked at him across the table. The morning light caught the side of his face, and I saw again the angle of his jaw that was David's, the eyes that were mine, and I felt the whole weight of him, the fact of him, the specific, irreplaceable person he was, settle in my chest with a fullness that was very close to pain. "I think that's right," I said. He nodded. He didn't pretend to be uncertain. I appreciated that. "You'll be all right," he said. Not a question, or not only a question. "I've been all right," I said. "That's not the same as fine, but it's something." He was quiet a moment. Then, "This helped. Being here. It helped me understand something." "What?" He looked at his coffee cup. "That I want what you and Dad had. The realness of it. I want to build that." He paused. "I couldn't have wanted it the right way before. I think I needed to see what it costs, what it leaves behind when it's gone." I felt my eyes fill, which I did not expect, and I pressed my lips together against whatever might have come next. "You'll build it," I said. "You already know more than most people do." He looked at me then, directly, with those gray-green eyes, and something passed between us, that same unspoken, fully understood acknowledgement, a recognition of what we'd been to each other this month, a recognition of what it had been and what it had not been and what it could not be, and the grace of having navigated that without damage. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Thank you," he said, "not for anything specific, for everything." He left on a Wednesday, late morning, the maple in the yard mostly bare now, the gold all fallen and gone to brown at the edges of the driveway. We stood beside his car the way we had stood the day he arrived, and the hug this time had a different quality, still long, still close, but with a sense of completion in it that the first hadn't had. I held him and felt him solid and real and departing. "Call me when you get in," I said into his shoulder. "Always," he said. He drove away. I stood in the driveway until the car was gone. Then I went inside, and the house went quiet again. But it was a different quiet now, one with a different texture. Not the held breath quiet of before. Something more like the quiet after music. The room still remembering the sound. I made a second cup of coffee, something I hadn't done in 3 years, and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the bare maple and thought about presence, and what it means to be truly seen, and how that gift can come from unexpected places and still be real, still count, still alter the landscape of a person's interior life without ever being named. The loneliness was still there. It would always be there, in some form, but it had changed shape. I was no longer invisible to myself. That, I thought, was what he had left behind. That and the quiet which now, finally, felt like my own.